Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, episode 337, Politics in Fantasy. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the milk of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, I'm an honest man in politics, so I shine more than I would anywhere else. My name is Jeff Ingram.
Coming at you from a purple state, I am Michael Miller. We are not a red state. We're not a blue state. Here at the World Builders Anvil, we are a purple state.
Or I'm a black state. I despise red or blue states. Not really. I don't despise the states. It's just the politics. But yes. I'm equally hated by everyone.
Oh, I think I hate you more than most.
No, you don't.
No, I don't?
You don't.
No, I probably don't. Okay, so we're talking politics today, and I think it's kind of funny considering how much you love to use politics in your games that we haven't actually, I don't know that we've ever done a show specifically about politics before.
I don't think. I've talked about government types before you were on once, and which that in itself is not the interesting thing of politics. I mean, it's interesting to me because I'm a geek, but that's not what's interesting about politics. Because one of the things I kind of want to get to early on, politics does not necessarily have anything to do with like government and rulers. People always associate that term with it because we call people in Washington politicians, or people in London are politicians. The
Parliament,
the ruling class, maybe Parliament.
Well, so this is an opportunity before you start really getting into the thick of the episode to take on the perspective that politics is really just like people wanting to get their viewpoint across. It's how people maneuver within a social system. So if you're at work and you've got that one guy who's always trying to, bully other people, and you've got some woman that you work with who's really cool and she always tries to mediate conflicts. That's all politics. That's what we're talking about. We're also talking about like government,
about workplace politics.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got that happens all the time, and I know you guys can empathize. Yeah, I know you guys can empathize with this.
Yeah.
So okay.
It started in grade school. Once you get two or more people in a room together, politics begins because it's really, it's a way we're socially constructed to get to the position of the societal norm of where we are, whether it be our preschool room or the playground or the workplace or as a nation. And right now we live in really politically divided times in the U.S. at least. Which means, for some reason, I'm supposed to hate people who don't agree with me implicitly, which probably includes myself because there are times I am like, why do I think that? So I should probably hate myself and everyone else. I don't necessarily think that's a right approach to life or politics, but right now, if you're on the right, you hate the left. If you're on the left, you hate the right. If people disagree with you, they must be on the opposite side, and you must hate them. It's a wonderful world, as should be said, but it's kind of disappointing right now. I see why people are frustrated, but that's not the point.
The world and your own, my opinion is that the world and certainly your own personal, perspective, like you should have enough room to be able to hear disagreements and have disagreements because we do all think differently, but you have to be open-minded. You have to be like, okay, I know I see it this way. That doesn't mean it's the only way to see it. It doesn't mean that I'm right. It just means that that's how I see it. And we are living in such a divisive time where people are very black and white about it, where it's like, I see it this way and thus any other way to be seeing it is wrong, which
it's where you get these
it's not helping us.
There's a powerful woman in fiction now. It has to be, because they're trying to make women more powerful, which whatever, who cares? I really don't care. the story is what I care about. And if I feel that happened to me in the story, I get annoyed. Or if they take like a male character and turn it into female for no apparent reason, and it just seems like lazy writing, I get annoyed. But if it's bad storytelling, I get annoyed. But it's not what I don't care what the storytelling is. I'm one of those weird people who I feel comfortable in a world where I am uncomfortable when I don't have everything the way I like it. So I'm a freak. So welcome to the world of Wilderness Anthem. It's 337 episodes. You probably realize that if you've listened to them all.
So let's go through some of these initial notes that you have here. What you've got written down here are politics are a part of your life and not just annoying politicians and activists on Twitter. So this kind of goes into what we were just saying, how politics filter into basically all of your social interactions. It could be something as simple as you and your spouse and you're posturing to get out of doing the dishes. You know what I mean?
It's
like,
a maneuver. Yeah,
it's a maneuver. We're talking about not necessarily.
I don't know how to clean dishes the way you want me to, honey.
It sometimes it's manipulative. Sometimes it's just perspective. Something that Jeff said before we started recording, I thought was really interesting, because we were talking about the nature of politics, and your thought on the nature of politics is it's all about control. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, what about if you're just trying to voice an opinion? You're not trying to control, but you're trying to share and you're trying to educate or empower. And you're like, well, that's still control, isn't it? And please elaborate more on that, because I thought it was really interesting.
So for me, the idea of politics is you're trying to control a situation enough at a minimum. You're trying to control a situation enough to not necessarily tell everyone else how to act, but to behave the way in which you want.
To be able to
act the way you want. That's probably a better way to put it. Whether or not you choose to,
or whether or not you're able to, that's
maybe. Yeah, it's like maybe I want to be able to buy the $1 billion boat, and I'm in a position where I'm able to buy a $1 billion boat, but I don't have $1 billion. I'll put my PayPal on this episode if you want to donate $1 billion. Actually, I don't have
you could put mine up there too. I would also be welcome to receiving $1 billion.
Yeah. So, if you're like, $1 billion, that's the minimum.
That's yes. There's a one donation button
for
$1 billion. There's no alternate amount. No alternate amount. There's one donation level,
and that makes you. I'll give you a phone call. It's our super Patreon level.
It's our super Patreon, and there's only the one.
We don't actually have a Patreon, so please don't go there.
Yes.
But yeah, it's this idea where it's about maneuvering yourself to be in the position. If you've ever played chess, right? You're trying to get your pieces in a position so you're able to do what you want to. And that's really what politics is. And it's what you are in the classroom or your high school or, as a country, when you join these silly little factions. Yes, to me, that's what politics is about ultimately. Now, it never feels like that because, I'm just fighting for the freedom to be able to vote. That would have not felt like you're fighting for control, but you really ultimately are. You're fighting for your ability, the control over yourself. At the time in America, at least, it was you didn't have to be a landowner to vote. And it was really hard for women to own land, which is why we talked about it as women gaining the right to vote. But really, if you were not a landowner, if you were in an apartment, you couldn't vote either. So it really helped a lot more than just women, but women were the primary beneficiaries of the movement in America, at least. So, and it's probably not quite that simple, but whatever. But the point is ultimately, even in a relationship, sometimes, it doesn't feel like control. It's like, I'm just trying to get my wife to recognize I help with the dishes too. I always get accused of not helping with the dishes, which is not true. But, that might be a reasoning someone has. Like, I just want the other person to recognize what I'm doing. So later on, they don't sit there and go, you never help around the house. I just helped with the dishes 10 minutes ago. So it's making sure that, what you're doing is seen and recognized. But there's a control battle happening there. And it's just the way humans, we interact with each other for good or ill. I think politics is truly an amoral thing. It's the politicians that make it immoral.
Mm.
Little Mark Twain coming out there.
So some of the ways you have something written here, things that are like our world. So by that, are you referring to like when you take the concept of politics to fiction, you're trying to reflect things in our world, or you're trying to use things in our world in the fictional world to get across either real world ideas, or you're just borrowing from the real world to get across ideas within the fictional?
Well, I mean, what you're saying is more of a tactical thing of how you do it.
Yeah, I'm talking about application here.
I'm really more talking about, at this point here is the idea where when you start talking about politics, people interacting with each other, you give the reader the ability to draw the conclusions. They're going to see parallels with the politics that's happening in a fantasy novel with the real world. And that's where sometimes people will say, oh, you're just trying to make women look stronger because the lead character is a woman. But you're trying to talk about the battle of a woman through society and a male-dominated society, which would be a fair thing to talk about here. The conclusion the reader comes up with is their own. But it's they're going to draw conclusions with the real world as they understand it, right or wrong.
Yeah.
But it's also going to allow them to. It's going to allow you to give them the ability to highlight differences. Where if I am talking about a hugely non-democratic society, but in a very, like I take a very American town, and I when the character leaves the very American town, he starts interacting with a very non-democratic society. It's going to allow the reader to have the chance to start drawing the differences between the world you've created and the world that they live in. So, it's like I think a book that did this really well is like Harry Potter. The idea the wizarding world was really a horrible society. I mean, beyond the approved slavery that happened with those poor little elves.
Yeah, approved slavery, blatant racism.
Yeah. Oh God, just a horrible world. The world of wizards. But it allowed me as a participant when I read or watched to draw my own conclusions about such things. And it was not necessarily all inserted. It was not necessarily her opinion, but it gave me the opportunity to have an opinion probably about things that she thought was important. I'm sure, which is why she chose the topics she did. Even like she never really addressed the whole slavery thing. I don't think just house elves are house elves, But it allowed me to think about it, and maybe that's all she wanted me to do. Maybe I missed her point. I don't know, but the great thing is, as the reader, the consumer, a lot of times you have a huge power over how you interact with it. So a lot of times when you get really upset at fiction, it's usually probably your fault. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I was actually going to say this a few minutes ago where like you got to get that your perspective colors your receival of information. So when you're watching a movie, when you're, reading a book, I think it's funny that my wife and I will be watching a show and I'm very annoying to watch a movie or a TV with, but my wife loves me very much and accepts that and allows me to do it. The thing that I do is pause it to talk all the time. I will go 2-3 seconds into a show and they'll say or do a thing and I will have an opinion and I will pause it. And my wife is kind enough to allow me to express that. So, but it's funny because we'll be watching something and I will get upset or have a reaction or an opinion to something, and she'll have seen it a totally different way. And that's because my wife's upbringing, while not dramatically different from mine, has, built a perspective for her that's very different than mine.
Yeah.
So like she'll look at a thing and there'll be times where she'll get real upset at something we watched. And I'm just like, well, and
that's one of the interesting things with fiction here is when you have a great fictional setting that people love, it creates opportunities for people, hopefully not during it, Michael.
I know, sorry.
To be able to have discussions though and sit there and work out these things and what they drew from it. That's to me an interesting part of fiction. It's not just partaking in it, but it's like, if you talk to someone else who's read, all of the Wheel of Time.
You have so been on this lately. You're still listening to them on Audacity?
Yes, I'm on 10 now.
You're on to 10?
Yeah.
So you're
if you go to
you're
this
coming into the
episode-
home stretch.
if you go to the episode for this podcast now, I have to write Audacity here. There'll be a link to our Audacity in there,
Mhm.
and if you do it, you can actually you get 2 free books if you do the free trial.
So does that count? Does that count as them sponsoring us? Is that
Well, I mean, it just means we sign up for their affiliate program, so we're not
okay?
technically sponsored by
Not
Audacity.
sponsored. Just we have like they have
We
an
an affiliate type of relationship.
like if they go in and type in like we have a coupon code or something.
Essentially, they'll go click on a link in the episode, or if you go to garduel.com/audacity, I'll put a shortcut there.
Okay.
Yes. Audible. Oh my goodness, my wife is spying in, and she's pointing out the fact I keep saying Audacity, which would not be a useful thing to get if you want to listen to
Oh, did I say that too?
audiobooks.
Did I say
Yeah,
that
we're
too?
talking- I don't know if you were, but I was.
We might have been using the wrong wording there. Sorry. Audible.
It is Audible, but if
Yeah.
you go to garduel.com/audible, you go to the show notes, go to garduel.com, look up episode 337. You'll see a link to it. You click on the link there, sign up for the free trial. You can, if you don't like it, you can reject it, but you can get 2 free books.
Thank you, Kristen.
So thank you, Kristen, for being, once again, my brain, my love, and I'll stop talking before I start saying things I should not record.
Fair enough. So you were saying you're on book 10 in Wheel of Time. You're about to make a Wheel of Time reference.
So, but the idea is someone who's gone through the entire journey of Wheel of Time, you can have a real deep discussion because there's a lot of world building that happens in there, and lots of different cultures, lots of different interactions with different types of belief systems. And the neat thing is sometimes you'll see the same events thought about from different groups, and they have completely different takeaways from it. And one of the neat like world building things I always find in there is a lot of times like cultural groups will think other cultural groups are full of debauchery. And when it first starts happening, it's things in the Western world you can identify with. Like, there's a group of people that are very open sexually. And in the West, that's sort of a verboten thing, that you don't really do. But then you start seeing it from other groups who look back at this one puritanical group and talks about how they think they're full of debauchery. So you start getting it from other cultural perspectives too, which is kind of a neat way of doing it. But you can start getting into these kind of discussions with people, whether it be just one book or a series of books or whatever. When the fiction is good enough and the things are memorable, you can have huge discussions over Star Trek or Star Wars or anything like that. To get to these points of, what are the political messagings and what do they mean? And you're probably all wrong. One thing I learned is even the writer's wrong. I remember learning this in college that you can't look to what the writer says something means because they wrote it. And that always confused me, but okay.
You can't say that again?
You can't look to the meaning of a text by what the writer says they meant by saying it because they wrote it.
Because they wrote it.
I didn't ever understand that one, but that's what.
Do you understand it now? Are you trying to explain it now? Okay. I think
writers can be very intentional with how they do things. So.
I think one of the big things that's happening though is it's just highlighting the societal differences. Mm-hmm. So you're highlighting different perspectives and different, looks on life and different viewpoints. And I realize I'm kind of saying the same thing, mm-hmm. but, by pointing out the difference is in a people or in leadership within your fictional world, you're highlighting the differences. And again, we start doing that one builds tension. 2 mm-hmm. gives your reader something to gravitate towards. They're going to gravitate towards something. Something is going to be like, oh, I identify with that, or ooh, I don't like that because I identify with the opposite of that, or whatever. So there's definitely some do's and don'ts when you start applying politics to what you're writing, and we got a little list here for you.
Not meant to be comprehensive, but meant to get to the point. So the 3 do's. You can use a person. Or you can use it to show a person's place in society. And I use society loosely. It could mean the entire society, or in the village society, or
the family structure, like whatever the confines of the story are.
whatever the confines of the story are, the borders of the story, it's a great way to show a person's place. And that's something people all identify with, is because we all have our place in society, whether we like it or not. And we probably don't, because people think it's greener on the other side of the fence.
Mm.
But even if they like it a little bit, people always have some things they want to change. That's what gets us to progress.
Mm.
The thing is, the readers can start connecting, good or bad, with characters by seeing how the characters fit into society, and taking their prejudices that they're bringing into the stories and drawing those conclusions. But I think that's a big do, is, by showing where a person fits in, it allows people to connect with them, right or wrong. It allows people to connect with characters.
So it also, when you start applying this stuff, you can address themes in your work. And this goes back to when we talk about the theme of a book, or the subtext of your book. So you can start putting in the conflicts of good and evil, or the oppression of a given gender, or a political group, or a minority. Like, these are all themes that you can use. That sometimes it's heavy-handed, sometimes it's just implied, but again, things that people are gravitating to, and also build to conflict.
Yeah. And so yeah, addressing your themes is a huge one. And the third one I think is really good to do is to describe and I call it a battle, but it's not necessarily the right word, is the battle between the individual and the society. Because any person in a society, for the good of society, sometimes people have to be sacrificed. Sometimes they have to be held up. Creating the winners and losers, they like to talk about in politics, and you can talk about and have discussions about these things. And once again, I think these are kind of immoral. The people who implement them might be immoral, but the thing is, whenever there's a group, what works for the group will never work for everyone in the group.
Mm.
And that's maybe not true in a small group, but as a group gets larger, that becomes more and more true. But it's a good way for you to start having those discussions, not only between the individual and the society, but groups in the society versus the other groups in the greater society. So like the group of Masons versus the entire city. You can start getting into those kind of discussions and those kinds of relationships, which is why one of the things I always talk about when you create factions is always think of them as characters. So you have the faction of the Masons Guild.
Mm.
Every Mason would be their own character. And if there's the city that the Masons work in, that would be another character too. And so they all have their own motives. And most of the Masons' motives will line up pretty closely with the motivations of the group, but it's not exact, So sometimes people get hurt internally by decisions that are made. Like, all Masons have to have a shop in the street because everyone but Bob does. Bob's in a bad position now because he's not on that street.
Mm.
But, and so now they're going to have to struggle with the city to get more property so Bob can have his place on the street because he's a Mason, or at least should be. So, it's just, it's a great way to start having those kind of conflicts that people are used to, because it's the fight over, does your town build or not build a new dog park? Do you invest more or less into your schools? These are discussions that we have all of the time, and there are always people who suffer from them, and there are always people who benefit from those decisions. So there we go. Those are the 3 do's.
So the 3 do's: show a person's place in society. It gives you opportunities to address your theme, and it allows you to start getting into conflicts. Show the battle between your individual and your societal, your goods, your bads, or not necessarily good or bad, you're black or white, but just perspective A and perspective B. Mm-hmm. So now what about the don'ts? Now
the don'ts, and this is where you start getting into the themes. And I think this is where themes turn bad, is people often water them down into memes.
Themes to memes.
Themes to memes. And let me be clear on what I mean by those 2 terms. So when about a meme, I'm talking about just a piece of cultural information being transmitted through imitation. So on the internet, you have the same pictures being used to talk about a response to something. It really, there's no value in a meme, except it gives you some information about the culture itself. A theme is a way you're trying to derive a value from cultural ideas. So, to me, a theme is you trying to add value to the discussion, where a meme is you're just trying to make a point because that's the point everyone's making. And the problem is those have a tendency to be watered down or change over time. And you might need something that, today that in 100 years makes you a bad person because they look at the term or the way of doing things as wrong, but they might not even understand what you're trying to get to. The big discussion here, I think of is, there were some writers back when they were fighting over the place of blacks in society that used words that are offensive today, but they were actually being countercultural, trying to point out the injustice of situations. But today, the mere fact that they use the word, it's become a meme to clamp down on people who use the word, even for people who were in a different time fighting a different battle. So that's one of those things. If you water down your themes into memes, they lose any sort of intrinsic value and just become you're passing information on to someone else, and they will add their own values to them at that point. So don't water it down, and once again, that's, I think, where a lot of things, when people are trying to create something that's culturally relevant, where it falls flat is because they've watered it down so much to stereotype. They've created stereotypes instead of actual real moments.
I'm going to call this next one your second one because you kind of put the first two together, but I think it was very appropriately done. So the next one you have here, it says, "Don't preach, show," which is, you guys have probably heard this before, which is the whole basic bit, like, don't preach, don't just pass the information as information, actually show an example of it, actually put it into action within the context of your story.
Like, show that a character is racist, which is a dangerous move today because you'll probably be called racist. But if you want to show that, which I don't think is necessarily a wrong thing to do, because it brings up the discussion, but show them acting that way.
Like,
say, there's Bob's a racist,
and you don't have to have him just say, well, I'm Bob the racist. Yes, that's his name in the book, and and he's just kind of on the nose, right? So and he then goes into exposition about his viewpoints on the world. I don't mind exposition as long as it is not really ham-fisted, but it tends to be, right? I mean, because it's just exposition at that point, as opposed to, like what we're saying, like creating scenarios within the action of the story where the character, instead of explaining what they're about or just flat out saying they hate a thing or they're against a thing or pro a thing, they take actions that display their feelings. That they take actions that let the reader know where they stand. And sometimes those, in good political novels and good, like spycraft sort of thing, they're doing all sorts of machinations that might be feints, right? Where they're feinting left when they're actually going to go right, where they're doing actions that support them thinking A when they actually think B. So that's really fun too. It's a little more complicated, but that's really fun too, as opposed to just having characters that are kind of one-dimensional if you just have them say what they're about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the idea, of the great political player where they'll come up with the plots that are designed to fail, but in doing so, you're unwittingly supporting the actual plots that they're trying to achieve. And you might not naturally align with where they're going, but because you help defeat the plot A of the villain, you've actually inadvertently propped up plot B.
And there's also funny stuff about this. There's did you ever watch Mother Night? I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, it comes from Kurt Vonnegut. I could be wrong on that. So if all of you are listening to this and screaming my inaccuracies, that's fine. I apologize if I'm wrong. But Mother Night was with Nick Nolte, and he plays an American. I believe he's overseas during like World War II, and he is a radio. I'm going to use DJs, not from spinning discs or anything. He's talking politics, and he calls himself the last free American. He's not in the United States. I want to say he was in Germany, and he is putting out anti-American propaganda on the radio as an American in a foreign country. But he is doing it as being told to him, very scripted, like they straight up gave him scripts from the U.S. government. So the U.S. government has actually planted him there to do this. Now, the thing that's funny is at one point in time, like later in the story, they're really digging into him. He's captured, he's imprisoned, and they're trying to find out if he's a double agent of some kind, if the U.S. did plant him. He won't admit it. They don't know. And there's another guy who's been captured, and he is on the other side. And he's like, look, it doesn't matter if you're a double agent or not, because all of the tenets that I have fought and killed to uphold, I learned from you. Which is a scary proposition where you're playing both sides of the coin, and you might be creating zealots and fervent soldiers opposing what you're trying to accomplish and passionate about it just because they're following the false propaganda that you're putting out there. So it's a great movie, and it definitely points out opportunities where, show but don't preach.
And then the final one here is don't talk about the moment. And by that I mean it's very sometimes you hear complaints. I've seen complaints like I think it was Far Cry 5 came out, people were sort of upset there weren't more direct allusions towards Trump and Trump supporters, because that was kind of, it came out at the time where that was becoming a cultural talking ground.
So they were complaining that wasn't in the game?
It wasn't. They weren't talking about the moment, but the problem was they didn't realize the game started like 5 years before Trump wasn't been elected. So if they would have talked about a moment, it would have been from 5 years ago. And the problem is when you start trying to do that, sometimes by the time you get to delivery, the moment has passed. And this is the thing about not being a Republican or Democrat, is every time there's a new president elected, he becomes the worst person ever. And he's trying to do things and take powers away from the people that's never happened before. And all of those things are really, really bad. And then when the next guy comes to power and the party is swapped, all of the arguments just flip. And the Democrats are arguing for what the Republicans did, and the Republicans are arguing for what the Democrats did. It happens every time. Not over every issue, but over, especially over stuff like how much power should the president be able to do with the stroke of a pen. All these really flip every time the parties swap power, or should we be, engaged in wars? Democrats are very anti-war until a Democrat is in office. So whenever you have these kinds of discussions, they just flip literally overnight whenever there's a major political election. And so the problem is if you get stuck in the moment, the point if you can't drill it down to the theme that you're trying to get to and have the discussion there, and you just start talking about these characters, these stereotypes that are important now might be by the wayside in 4 years. And, or they might be just as bad and you're lucky. But the problem is if you get caught in that moment, when the moment's over, you become irrelevant. And so I think to me, it's ultimately more important to get to the theme of what you're trying to discuss and forget about the superficial parts of the moment. If you're arguing against executive authority, argue against it, but don't try and paint a Trump or an Obama into the person you're talking to. Don't just rename the Democrat and Republican Party, and make them the villain, because in 4 years they might be the ones who are arguing the same point you are.
I think this lends into a different subject, the idea of creating fiction that's evergreen, which obviously, if we could all do that and do it well, it would be great. I think it's impossible. I think it's important to have both. I think it's important to have fictions that do speak to the moment, and I think it's important to have fictions that are evergreen. But I think the big point about using politics in a novel and being evergreen is when you're talking about your themes, like you just said, those, like a lot of these themes that we're dealing with, good, evil, oppression, empowerment, these are things that aren't going away. They've been around forever. Like, we're going to be dealing with these as long as there's human beings to have opinions about it. Someone wants to be in charge. Someone doesn't want that person to be in charge. Like these, power themes are constant. They're always going to be there. So you don't have to latch onto a moment. Now, if the point of your book is to encapsulate a moment, then sure, I don't want to discourage that. But our point is, as far as politics in the book goes, try not to attach to the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that the thing is, if you want to be in the moment, be able to deliver quickly.
Yeah. If you have a blog, great. If you're writing a novel,
it might be too long.
It might be too long.
It's the idea where, it's a great idea. It's like, you create this great vampire fiction, and but the problem is, it gets even picked up by a publishing house, and then all of a sudden, the moment for vampires has passed, and they're now into zombies. So now they have your book, they have the rights to your book, and they bury it, or they just release it too quickly because that moment has passed.
There was some movie, it was a movie or a TV show I watched where that exact thing happened, where somebody was like, they were I think a young adult fantasy writer, and they had done either a vampire or a werewolf book, and they were like, oh no, this is on its way out. So the publisher wasn't interested. Yeah. So they went to the computer. They changed all the words vampire to centaur. They changed all the vampires to centaurs, and boom, a new genre.
New novel.
Yes, and the novel ended up being super popular, and it made me laugh so hard because I was like, yeah, I see that.
And you think about it too, it's like you see something that's like, and I didn't see much of it, but like there was something, I think it was called iZombie, and we're just
iZombie,
eye in front of their dictates its place in time. But it was really Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but with zombies.
Was it?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
I never watched it. I watched I think one episode, and I really didn't like it, so I couldn't get behind it because I didn't like the concept.
But you like brain drool zombies, and
yeah, I have maybe a narrow opinion of what zombies should be. I think I have a lot of different types of zombies that I accept, but thinking, talking,
is even smaller.
Thinking, talking, reasoning zombies, I have a problem with.
And I think that was exactly what you're talking about, like creating a centaur. They were trying to just because zombies were becoming popular. They wanted to take their formula and make it relevant in the new popular genre. And that's really what happened. But it was the vampire formula.
The Zampire.
The Zampire.
Did we just create a new thing?
Yeah, my mispronunciation. A new genre.
Zampitors. Okay. So we want to bring this in for a landing?
Yeah, let's bring it for a landing here.
Okay. So world building task. Create a world-specific version that is acceptable in your world of Twitter to annoy your characters with your politicians. So that could simply be it could simply be the town crier, hear ye, the king's new decree, and it's whatever he wrote on the pot that morning.
Or more insidious, use magic in your world. So it gets the ideas of the important rulers and their opponents can be inserted into people's heads as they go through the day,
but not, I assume, as
compulsion,
not as Inception, where they think it's their idea, but it's like being news. It's like force-fed news. It's like okay, the king is now wanting this, or the queen is now wanting that, and the archduke is
the king is a poopy pants.
Yeah. All right. What about our real world task?
Okay, so here I have learn proper cleaning techniques. When you get into politics, you're going to feel dirty. So you want to make sure that you know how to take a proper cleaning. Plus, it'll help you in the age of viruses. It's just a side benefit, but really, you're going to feel filthy if you do sort of like government level politics and you make a decision, but that poor town is not going to get the water they need, or the water will be diverted to the city and the town will die off. Once again, those things where you're you're arguing politics where we need the water to get to the people in the city, but we're going to have to divert the stream so all of the farms over there die off.
Get some sanitizer to wash your hands of it, and get some mouthwash because it's going to leave a bad taste in your mouth.
Realize, though, when you partake in fiction, that if you're dealing with groups of people, that there are going to be politics, whether your fiction's set in a playground or it's set in a country or in a world or in a universe. Politics will abound. Accept it and consider it as you create your fiction.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.